So for I want to say like the 46th time at this point, I have had a little bit of a break here on the channel for a few weeks there. I keep saying I'm going to get back into my schedule, and I kind of have at certain points, and then life just gets in the way. In a good way, it's not a bad thing, so don't you guys worry. But my schedule is definitely all over the place, but I'm finally going to try and get back into it, because obviously we are in the lead up to Survivor, and I sort of can't not cover this game. I'm so keen for it. I've been waiting a long time, and as a content creator, it is just like a must that I'm a Star Wars gaming creator. I have to cover this game. So we're going to get back into the schedule here, and for those who weren't aware, even though I haven't really been uploading as much, I have still been streaming on the channel, and for those who haven't seen, I've been streaming the final playthrough of Fallen Order. Now, I have played this game through from start to finish 6 times, and this is the 7th time that I've played it. However, I haven't actually played it in probably 2 years now. I kind of played it like a bunch of times all when it came out, and so I'll be honest, I completely forgot how good of a game this is. It is such a special Star Wars game in my opinion. It's definitely far from perfect, but there's so many elements to this game that I just absolutely love. And today I wanted to talk about essentially what made Fallen Order such a special game. There's a lot of stuff that I'm pretty sure will carry over to Survivor. It just feels like that is going to be the case, but I do hope that they can carry essentially all of this over, because if Survivor can have all of the stuff that I'm about to mention, as well as obviously it will just have improvements, gameplay improvements, graphics improvements, all that kind of thing, then I think we could be in for an absolute banger. So hopefully they can nail this stuff in Survivor as well. Now, the first part for me that is probably the most like memorable is just the, I guess, atmosphere and the ambience of the game. It just feels very, very Star Warsy. I don't just mean in terms of like the in-world ambience, when you're like exploring a planet and it feels very Star Warsy, but also just like the soundtrack, the menus, when you go to meditate and all that kind of thing, it all just feels very, very Star Warsy, but completely its own thing as well. Like, a lot of the soundtrack is the type of music that we haven't really heard that much in Star Wars. It has that Star Wars element to it, but when you hear those different soundtracks, you know that that is from Fallen Order. You know it's not something from the movies. There's obviously a couple of, themes throughout the game that are from the movies, but the fact that it holds up so well on its own while still feeling completely Star Wars, I think that is the biggest draw for it for me, just because that is a very hard thing to do. And if you can make something feel very Star Warsy while also not just purely relying on the franchise, making it good on its own but still Star Warsy, that is like a massive, massive thing for me. So I think that's my favorite part about Fallen Order in general, is just like there's so many little moments that I can remember from the game that just nail that like atmosphere and the feeling of Star Wars, while not feeling as though they've just like copy pasted it from another game or another movie. Now, something else that kind of goes hand in hand with that in a way is just to do with the planets. Now, there's obviously a lot of old planets that we had been on before or seen in movies and shows, even books, but there's also some new planets obviously that we had never seen in Star Wars, and essentially they didn't exist until this game came out. Now, I think the mix that they had was really, really solid. Now, I think we all would have probably liked more planets. That's something that I think everyone is just always going to want more. I think that's fair enough. They could have 50 planets and I'm pretty sure we'd all be saying, oh, why isn't there 60? Like, that's just how people are. We always want more stuff, but the mix that we did have, I thought, was really, really solid. I look at maps, or I should say planets, like Bogano and Zepho that are obviously new to the game and new to Star Wars in general, and they do feel very Star Warsy. Like Bogano, for me, that does feel like a Star Wars planet. Zepho is maybe a bit less of a Star Wars feeling planet with like the tombs and stuff. That's something we haven't seen as much in Star Wars, but just because we haven't seen it, it doesn't mean it doesn't feel Star Warsy. It's just a very different take on, the stuff that we typically see. But I just thought, once again, the planets in the game, they just felt very Star Warsy, and they did a really, really good job of mixing the old planets that we already knew about with the new planets. It is a pretty hard thing, in my opinion, to introduce a new planet and make it feel Star Warsy. Now, partly that might not be the truth, because there are so many planets in Star Wars that at this point you could almost just do anything and just be like, well, it's just a different planet in Star Wars, so that's why it feels not Star Warsy, because it's, they're all different. There is always that excuse. I remember the planet, I can't even remember the name, but the planet in Kenobi that just kind of looked like Earth. It just was like very boring looking. People did call that out and say, oh, that doesn't look Star Warsy, and so it's a pretty easy thing to do to make planets that don't feel that way. But I personally think that the planets in this game felt very much like I was, actually exploring a planet within Star Wars. Another key element for me for this game was the combat. It's obviously, I would argue, the biggest and most important part of a game like this. If the combat sucks and the gameplay isn't fun, then it doesn't matter how good everything else is if the gameplay isn't fun, and the game isn't going to be fun. But I personally thought the combat was really, really solid in this game. I do see where some people are coming from when they say, the lightsaber feels like a baseball bat because it's not a one-hit kill. It should be, really. You should be cutting people in half. Obviously, we all know how lightsabers work, but that has to happen for balance. If everyone was just a one-shot kill, if you just could kill everyone in one hit, that would be really boring and it wouldn't be fun for new players or old players. And so I definitely see where people are coming from. You hit a stormtrooper and it doesn't really do that much to them. I do get it, but obviously for gameplay balance, you have to do that. But in terms of like the boss fights and fighting like purge troopers and the slightly tougher enemies, I thought the combat was genuinely like very, very good. I would probably give it like an 8 out of 10. It's not the best combat when you compare it to say like God of War and stuff. It does feel a little bit clunky compared to those games, but if you compare it to every game ever with combat, it definitely felt very, very good. So the combat for me was a big part of it because I think it's pretty easy to get the combat wrong. You look at Battlefront 2, the hero combat in that game, maybe not the blaster combat, but the lightsaber combat in Battlefront 2, at least at the start, was like genuinely bad. It was just not good. It's maybe a bit different because it's a multiplayer game. It doesn't need to be quite on the level of Fallen Order, but I do think it is pretty hard to make the combat of a game really solid, especially with something as iconic as a lightsaber. Like that is a kind of, added pressure that they've got on top of it, that it's not just any old combat. It is, you're using a lightsaber. So there's probably a lot of pressure there, and I think personally they did a very, very good job with it. Now, the final thing on this list here for what I thought made the game just a special Star Wars game was the story, and kind of linking back to what I said earlier was the mix of it being really good on its own. It didn't need like a bunch of characters that we'd seen in Star Wars before. Obviously, we see a couple that we know. We see Vader, we see Saw Gerrera. There are characters that we know there, but pretty much every other character in the entire game was just a brand new character, which I think is a pretty hard thing to do in Star Wars because we kind of all want, or I shouldn't say all because I know a lot of people don't like fan service, but I think most Star Wars fans kind of want to see the characters that we all know. And so when you're introducing completely new characters, that's a pretty tough thing to do, and it's also a lot of pressure because what if we don't like those characters? Like if you bring back Obi-Wan and Anakin in a video game, we already like those characters. You don't need to like sell us on those characters. Whereas with Cal and the crew, you kind of do have to sell us on those characters because we don't know a thing about them. So I think the fact that they had so many elements of the story that were completely their own thing, and they managed to make that successful while also still linking it to a big part of Star Wars, which is like Order 66 and just little nods to the pre-existing franchise we hear, like the Obi-Wan transmission and little things like that. I think they did a really good job of just trying to like make it their own thing, but they obviously had to tie it slightly to the story and throw in a couple of little fan service moments, which for me is a really, really solid thing. So that's definitely a big one. It's probably one of the hardest ones to pull off. Pulling off a good story is probably always a difficult thing to do because it is very subjective. Like one person could say it's the best story of all time, and one person could say it's the worst story of all time. There's pretty much no objectivity to it. But the fact that I think most people who played the game would say, yeah, the story was pretty good. It wasn't the best story we've had in Star Wars, but overall it was pretty solid. I think that was a big part of what made that game so special. Like I said, I hope they can sort of manage to do much of the same with Survivor and sort of get all of those things that I just mentioned really, really good, because I know that the combat's going to be better, the graphics are going to be better, there looks like there's going to be a bit more like open world in terms of like not a full open world game, but the maps or the planets are going to be a little bit more open. There will obviously be improvements. It's going to be on next gen consoles, like it's just going to be a better game. But if they can get all the elements that I just mentioned, that is where I think it actually will be a genuinely good game, compared to if it just feels like an upgraded version but everything else kind of sucks, then obviously that's not going to end very well at all. So I'm keen to see if they can pull it off. I'm confident that they can, but we will just have to wait and see. If there's anything that you guys think that I missed in the video as well in terms of what you think made the game special, be sure to leave a comment down below. I am very keen to hear your thoughts. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and may the force be with you always.